Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you that are joining us, feel free, of course, to make yourself at home. It's good to see you. It's good to see so many familiar faces. And I was just saying it feels like the last time, perhaps before the Christmas break, that we gather before everyone leaves town and goes home. So it's really good to have you here for the CHES annual lecture, the lecture of the Coalition for Health, Ethics and Society, supported by Johnson & Johnson. My name is Elizabeth Kuiper. I'm Associate Director here at the EPC. And it's been a busy year for CHES because we have been working on a lot of topics and clearly also linked to the fact that health, since a few years now, is elevated to a more strategic priority, which got confirmed again last week with the publication and the presentation of the Economic Security Doctrine, where health also figured again when it comes to geopolitical dependencies and supply chain issues. But clearly also the adoption of the Biotech Act, which still, I think, is eagerly awaited, because with some of you, we were saying that indeed I have been checking before I left my desk just 30 minutes ago whether it was already presented. And I think it seems also building on the issues apparently there were between DG Grow and DG Santé about patents, that literally as we speak, it's crunch time, because apparently there is now a rendezvous to see indeed how the two DGs could agree. So probably, I was jokingly saying, if I see, so Niklas, good for you to know, all of you looking at your smartphones, that probably that is the minute that the Biotech Act will be released. But I think, notwithstanding its exact content, I think it is an important day, and I think it also marks the end of a year where we have seen a lot of initiatives in the biotech sector, with, of course, earlier in the year, the life science strategy, which is very ambitious. We have been writing about it also together with Pavel, about the fact that by 2030, the EU aims to be the most attractive place for the life science sector, which, realizing that this is only in 4 years' time, is clearly very ambitious. But I think the EU came to realize, and this clearly is a realization that we also read in the Draghi and the Letta reports, that the biopharmaceutical sector is of great importance in strategic means for the EU. And I think in that respect, the stakes could hardly be higher for the Biotech Act, because we have been discussing also this year in roundtables about the value of health, but also about brain health, that we have been seeing already in 24 that the number of clinical trials in China took over from the US. So that tells you something about not only the innovation capacity of the sector, but also for what's stake at the EU level. So in that respect, I think it will be important to also get it right for the Biotech Act, both when it comes to the strategic resilience and economic growth, but also more about societal resilience when it comes to also translating the importance of the biotech sector for EU citizens. And that's exactly, I think, why we're so happy, Niklas, to be accompanied by you today for the CHES annual lecture. I think you don't need introduction, because I heard some people saying that they're coming exactly for you this afternoon. But Dr. Niklas Blomberg, you joined IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative, as the executive director, I think, in January last year. 2 years ago, exactly, in January 26. So that's a very good momentum indeed to also take stock of the current challenges for the EU, but also to discuss in more detail the need to translate health research excellence in solutions that indeed reach patients. And for those of you that have attended the CHES annual lecture earlier, I think the format is quite well known. I will invite Niklas to come on stage and indeed deliver his opening remarks. And then indeed we will have a fireside chat on the podium, but clearly also with the invitation for all of you to come in, because I think it is a year, as I said, where we're taking stock of all the initiatives, but also clearly in light of the MFF and other initiatives to look forward and to see what 26 will bring. So please do join us in the conversation. But with that, Niklas, I would like to invite you, and it's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and a little bit of a pressure after that very kind introduction. So thank you very much for that. So I'm the executive director of IHI. We are a public-private partnership funded on the Horizon Europe. I'm not here really to talk about IHI, but I just want to mention a few things as a start before I sort of move into the lecture proper. We are part funded by the European Commission, so the European Union through the European Commission, and the health industries in Europe, and essentially all our projects that we fund, we're a research funder, are to 50% co-funded by either industry or industry together with say, a large philanthropic organization or civil society organizations. And I think that's really where I wanted to start with the talk today. I mean, we were meant to say something clever about the Biotech Act and the MDR revision, but I think I'll just take that bit out for the moment. But if you go back, the Biotech Act, in a way, is the first tangible or legislative outcome of the Draghi report. And so the Draghi report came about 2 years ago now. It described Europe's problem in quite some detail and highlighted areas where we need to work together. But actually, if you think about what's happened since the Draghi report, the world has changed quite a lot. And we just need to look at over the Atlantic. And I think there are three letter combinations that really point to additional changes. So the first is, of course, the FDA. There's been a lot of changes at the FDA, and so we will see what that means for Europe's industry in terms of regulatory approvals in the US. There has been a lot of changes at CDC. That's the second three-letter combination, and I think we need to see what that means for Europe in terms of preparedness and pandemic response. And I think the possibly the biggest challenge of them all is MFN, the third three-letter word, so most favored nation pricing. What is clear is that there is a dramatic change in the way US will procure and pay for innovation, and that will also affect the European health industry. And I think this is really important because that links to the challenges that we have in Europe and in health research and innovation in Europe, which is really how do we deal with innovation and the demographic changes within essentially a cost-contained healthcare system. Health costs 10% of GDP in Europe. It will probably cost 10% of GDP in 15, 20 years as well. But how do we deal with the challenges and the changes that are coming? How do we make space for innovation inside the European system now when the model where essentially US paid for those innovations for us is not working anymore? And so I think that's one of the big challenges. And this is where I'd like to move into to the discussion on partnership. But so here I talked about problems, and I think this is something we do very well in Europe. We tend to talk about problems and describe them in great and exquisite detail. And I think one of the peculiarities of Europe is actually that we tend to fund against problem. We describe the problem in great detail, we bring in stakeholders, and so the main narrative becomes our problems. But actually, investments are usually not allocated to problems. Investments are allocated to opportunities. You fix problem and then you invest in opportunities. And so with this, I'd like to change the narrative a little bit and start to think about what can we do to invest in opportunities, but most importantly, and I think that's why I'm here, talk a little bit about how we do those investments to drive the outcomes that we want. And so then, of course, what are the opportunities? But I think, and I'll center my talk around that. If you look in the Draghi report, it articulates not only problems, but actually also the opportunities around Europe. So one is around clinical trials, which we must get right. So that, if you want, is almost like a defensive opportunity. We need to make sure we can run multi-country scalable clinical trials in Europe. Draghi talks about data and the European health data space. I think personally this is probably the offensive opportunity. This is where we can really leverage the fact that we have comprehensive healthcare in Europe, both to drive innovation but also to drive equity across Europe. And very few other continents have that level of inclusion. And so the question for Europe is really how do we make use of that? Now, we are a continent of small countries. So if we want to succeed, we need to do this across countries. It's a multi-country problem. And then I think the last bit is that how do we turn these challenges, the demographic challenge, also the challenge of climate and the impact of climate on health, into opportunities for innovation in Europe? And most importantly, how do we make sure that we get the innovation that we need in the European system. So just to exemplify this, and I thought I would pick brain. Pavel is here. You just published a wonderful report on neurology, but if we think for the moment on Alzheimer's disease, so I think this is a really good example. It's of course a devastating disease, and many of us in the room, I think, will know someone who lives with Alzheimer or lives with dementia. I certainly do. It's also a very rapidly increasing societal cost. I mean, currently there is about 7-8 million people in Europe who are living with Alzheimer's disease. If you go forward to 2050, that will double. What will also double is the cost of managing that, which is currently being estimated to about $300 billion per year, both in terms of care and in loss of productive hours. And so that might also double into 2015. So it's a big challenge, but it's actually also an area which is really ripe with innovative solutions. So there was a recent paper this year looking at the Alzheimer portfolio. There is currently over 130 new compounds in clinical development. So there is a lot of things happening in terms of innovation in the Alzheimer's space. And of course, this year we had the approval by EMA on lecanemab, so the first drug to slow cognitive decline. But it came with really important reservations, because there are risk of side effects such as brain swelling. So when you roll out this treatment, you also need to roll out quite an expensive monitoring program with advanced imaging technology. And so I think this is a really good example of how breakthrough solutions in health also can add complexity and costs for the healthcare systems. And it's a good example of how a treatment will completely change the treatment pathways and the care pathway and how you organize care. Alzheimer's is also an area where we have seen very rapid development in early diagnostics. So there start to become blood-based biomarkers being available. So that opens up for a better prevention, early detection, targeted prevention, and you might even be able to not only diagnose the disease at an early stage, but you might be able to do this diagnosis outside the hospital memory clinics and move that into primary care. So that, again, I think is an example of how a healthcare innovation is not only sort of providing solutions for the patients, but it's actually also impacting on the whole systems. If we shift all of those checks into routine primary care, then we will also need to change a lot of the prevention into primary care. And so there is a healthcare change that follows with the innovation. In IHI, we have been looking at this, so we have a couple of projects in the space that are looking to see how you can develop a toolbox for early intervention, how that works inside a number of healthcare systems. And so there is a comparison between European healthcare systems, so across learning, and most importantly, this is coupled with healthcare economic modeling. So how can you understand the cost effectiveness of different treatment pathways? And I think this, this is really about supporting the choices the sort of European systems will need to make. This is true not only for Alzheimer, it's a good example. We have very similar projects also in cardiovascular, and with the very same issues, looking at early prevention, early diagnosis in different setting, in different socioeconomic setting, inside different healthcare systems, and try to do the learning. We also have a portfolio of projects that are looking at exactly this shift. How can you do the advanced care beyond the hospital walls? I met earlier today with a group from Denmark, from the Rigshospitalet. They boldly state that in 2035 they aim to do 80% of the current hospital interventions outside of the hospital in the patient's home. So to shift the number of days the patient spend in hospital to 80% of those days should be spent with treatment in the patient's home. So that's a huge change of the healthcare system. And here I think it's a couple of points, because it's not only a sort of a massive change of the healthcare systems coming in the next year. I think this will also impact on how we do research. So if you think about clinical trials. So as more and more of the care pathways are moving out of the hospital system, and more of the patient interactions are happening in remote monitoring, then the way patients are identified, recruited, and consented for clinical trials will need to change. It will be a much more distributed system. You will also, because the patients will not come into the clinics for routine follow-up, that will happen outside the hospitals. The clinical trials will need to be distributed, and you need to think about the sampling, the distribution of compounds in a completely different way. And so the changes, the healthcare systems and the changes that are triggered by healthcare innovation will also change the way we are doing research in the future. And so I think this is one of the points I'd like to make, is that advanced research in the coming 5 to 10 years will not be possible without involving multiple actors throughout the system. As soon as you go beyond the molecular biology in the lab and try to do something ambitious, you will need to align the researchers, the payers, the hospitals, maybe community care centers, patients, regulators, and industry. And so it becomes a sort of coalition type research, because there will be changes that affect all of these actors in the system. And so if we want to connect the innovation to implementation, it's like the future competitiveness fund, and I think we'll spend some time talking about that in a few minutes, we need to find a way of bringing these actors together already from the start, and to make sure that we enable this innovation journey throughout, all the way from early ideas all the way up to implementation. And so the research programs in health, they will actually need to live and manage the very changes that they are trying to instigate. So I think that's a big change for the research program. And so what do we need? And I think there are this means that there are 4 areas, and we need innovation in 4 areas, and we also need programs that connect innovation in these 4 areas. I mean, the first is the research, the innovation, the innovative solutions themselves. And we know how to do that. We know how to develop advanced imaging. We have all the opportunities of AI, but also biology is very rapidly our understanding of diseases. And so that innovation in itself, the innovative treatments. We also need to work with the regulators. So how do you take those innovations through a regulatory pathway, but also how do you help the regulators to do the science today that allow them to assess the solutions of tomorrow? And so that's a debate in IHI we often have with EMA, and what are the type of projects we need to run. We need the practitioners. There needs to be an implementation strategy. And so many of these innovations, as I try to exemplify, will also trigger changes inside the healthcare systems. So how do you get the healthcare systems into and part of that innovation journey? And then, of course, the payers. How are the tools and treatments cost effective? Value-based pricing models will probably be part of this. And then what are the business models for the European healthcare companies, the European health industry, that can respond and support that change? And so I think this is really where Europe's unique model comes in. So the joint undertakings, the IHI, they were foreseen in the European treaties to create a body where multiple actors can jointly govern a program. And so if I look at IHI, we have in our governing board, we have an equal number of votes of industry and of the European Commission, the public sector. And so they are meant to be these neutral brokers, multi-stakeholder oversight, that are able to drive these ambitious and transformative programs. And so if we look at these European public-private partnerships, I think we can talk about what we want to do in Europe, but actually what I'd like to talk a little bit about here in the last couple of minutes is how we do it. What is it that makes these partnerships successful? And how do we shape them for the future? And I think that can be summarized in 3 elements. I like to think about the right topics, the right actors, and the right instruments. And so, if you start with the right topic, is sort of finding the sweet spot, as you might say. It sounds trivial in a way. Of course, you need the right topic for a partnership. But actually, in IHI, I think this is one of the hardest problems. So this If I look at the discussions we have with our members and with our board, defining the topics where we want to do the interventions is often the most difficult issue. And I think the reason for this is that you need to think about opportunity and opportunity cost, because all the actors have different interests. If you look at the policy makers, the public, there needs to be a very clear link between the topic and the policy objective, because you are going to spend a large amount of public funding. And so that element needs to be there. At the same time, for industry, you need to find a topic where it's the industry rather put 10 million into an IHI program or a project, rather than taking those 10 million and invest in their own product development pipeline, because that cost will always be there. They have a direct opportunity cost and need to make choices. And I think it's the same for the third actor that we have in our program, which is the philanthropic organizations. Why would they sit down in a very complicated European program when they can act very quickly and independently on their own? So what is the added value for the philanthropics to join? And so we say right topic, it sounds very trivial, but actually this is where you have to spend a lot of time. And if you get it right, you can move forward with scale. But you need to think very carefully about the topic definition. I think also there you need to recognize that it is a collaboration. So you will need to compromise from all sides, and it's about finding what are the most important thing for all the sides. I think the second element is the right actors. And what I think is important here is to think about capabilities, not cash. So public-private partnerships have often been seen as a way of multiplying public funding. We see it in many European reports on partnerships where they look at the leverage factor. You put €1 of European funding, put €1 of industry funding, and sometimes it's even better, you get €1 of member state funding. So you get more money. Actually, what I think is the really critical success factor is not the leverage. It's the additionality. It's the capabilities. When I look at our project, the 50% of the in-kind from industry is people. And so this means that the researchers, the experts from industry, work alongside the academic researchers, the healthcare system. It's that's where the magic happens. That's where you put people together. That's what's transformative. The other thing that industry brings into our projects is, in areas like imaging, is engineering capabilities. I mean, very few universities can build an X-ray machine in their basement. You need the Siemens of this world. You need large engineering departments to do those modifications. If you bring that together with advanced healthcare, you can suddenly do things that is not possible for each of the partners alone. In pharma, I think the same is true for regulatory. The pharma companies have very strong regulatory departments, and we see in our program how that really supports our projects in the discussions with regulators and taking the innovations onto that regulatory journey. I think the last bit is really the right instruments. So do we have the tools, the instruments that really drives the outcome that we want? Often we tend to first think about the instruments, and then you fit the objectives around the instruments. I argue that to be really successful right now in Europe, we need to go the other way around. We really need to think about what are the outcomes we want to see at the European level in health, and what are the type of instruments that we need to drive those changes. And I think that is, we can look at governance, but I think it's important to look at things like, what are the rules that bring out these capabilities? What are the capabilities that we want industry to put to the table? How can we better leverage the often deep knowledge around disease areas and the landscape to sit in the philanthropic organizations? How can we link in the many public-private partnerships that exist at the national and at the regional level? How can we bring in the right actors into the what are the funding rules? What are the implementation details that really drive those coalitions? I think the other and a big part of that for us is really the question of how do you valorize the capabilities? Because if we think capabilities not cash, then the question is how do we valorize and incentivize the right capabilities to be brought forward to the big problems in Europe? And I think one big area here is to think about data. How do we incentivize all the actors in the system to contribute data into the European health data space? How do we incentivize joint and transparent innovation around those data assets that includes the oversight and the engagement also with civil society, patient groups and other actors? I think that's one of the big, if we think the European health data space is this big opportunity, what are the instruments that really will enable that opportunity to come to fruition? So I think I've used a little bit more than my 15 minutes, Elizabeth, but I hope I at least have started to point to some of the opportunities, and there are some challenges ahead. I think there are also some opportunities. So I think with that, I just want to thank you all for the time and the attention, and we can perhaps have a conversation about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Niklas. Yeah, this seems to be working, I think, Tatjana, right? Yes. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot to unpack, and it's also very interesting that literally while you spoke, the Biotech Act got released, and the headline of the Commission, thanks to my colleague Sam who sent it to me, and the headline of the Commission is that the Biotech Act will make the EU more innovative, more competitive, and more resilient. So in that respect, I think that's a really interesting start, I think, for our conversation. And I very much appreciated also your take on a more positive take on the importance of the biopharmaceutical sector and also the importance of research for the EU. Because clearly working for a think tank means that sometimes, or very often, the glass is half empty. And we are at a point in time where indeed there is a lot to worry about. But before perhaps we also go into more positive developments, let me indeed perhaps start with a question against the backdrop of the Biotech Act about what you see as the biggest challenges, of course, from the largest public-private partnership that you're dealing with. What is the most urgent challenge the EU faces when it comes to translating research into real access for patients? Someone said the other day, if the glass is empty, it means you need another bottle, which I thought was an interesting one as well.
No, but coming back, so we are a research program. We are not limitations beyond the scope. I think this works better. Yeah, much better. Okay, but so there are a couple of there are many important unmet public health needs, and I think there will be many important unmet public health needs. If we park those for a second, because it's cardiovascular, it's the brain diseases, it's neurology, it's many of the rare diseases, but we also have the infectious disease. If we park those for a second, I think the one big area for us where we have a lot of discussion is, of course, on clinical trial and especially on the multinational clinical trial. I know the Biotech Act is supposed to address that and put up some improved quantitative targets. But I think this is also a multi-actor problem. And so there is scope for innovation. And if we look at the program, we also see opportunities. And I come back to my opportunities, but we have a recent example in type 1 diabetes, creating strong networks across Europe that not only drives the trials, but I think most importantly also act as the stewards of the innovative methods that drive the modern trials. So someone needs to oversee and drive that method development. And in Inodia, that cut down a new treatment for type 1 diabetes. The trial went from the projected 10 years to just over 4 years with an improved protocol. So I think those are definitely challenges, but also opportunities. We have a lot of discussion around regulation. We have, talk to the industry partners in the medical device and the diagnostics field. That's a big one. We have a project to look at that. The European health data, the regulatory sandboxes foreseen. We just launched a project around the regulatory sandboxes. That's another big area for competitiveness, I think. And the last bit is data. I think we have we have 19 projects right now that are looking at various aspects of real world data and real world evidence. So how do you turn that data into actionable evidence with regulators? So.
I mean, perhaps touching on that global dimension that you hinted at, because clearly it is good to see also in the life science strategy that indeed multi-country clinical trials is seen as one of the flagship initiatives, and there's a lot of focus for the importance of clinical trials. At the same time, we're living in a world where I've already mentioned China took over the US in terms of the numbers. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to investment with a sort of America first and then a sort of a MAGA approach where indeed also companies are saying, well, yeah, if we're pressured, I think the FT the other day said that 45% of companies, and again, this was global, not just pharma, but global companies were rather thinking about investing in the US, and only 8% of companies are thinking about investing in the EU. So from the perspective of indeed public-private collaboration, how do you ensure that the big issue where, of course, it's often said that the EU is good in regulation, but that the real innovation happens elsewhere? How do you ensure that what starts in Europe doesn't leave the EU? And also, how do you then nurture that ecosystem where I think you are very well placed from the IHI perspective?
So, I mean, some of those questions are much broader than what we do, but so investment is one of the things that we don't do, for instance. I think there are other people who are better to, but I think what we see ourselves, I think we see as a way of stimulating and foster these innovation ecosystems. So how do you connect the researchers, the healthcare systems, and the industry? And I think I talked about people. I think that's a really, really important part of what we do. If we look through our portfolio, what is happening is that, I mean, essentially every week of the year, there will be students and postdocs funded by our programs coming out of the universities, funded by our and participating in our projects that have the experience of close collaboration between academia and industry. And I think that's one of the sort of people aspect of this is often underestimated. I think it's a really important part of what we do. A number of these will stay in academia. Many of them will move on to Europe or to industry in Europe. But I think that fostering that ecosystem of industry, academia collaboration in health, I think is a really important part of the program.
Perhaps because you mentioned indeed some brain health related topics, and indeed we recently had a roundtable here at EPC where we also delved deeper. So when it comes to successfully moving from research into clinical practice, and also coming back to what you said about the importance of having the right instruments, what are critical success factors in your opinion? Or in your experience, of course, also building on IHI?
Yeah, so I think the challenge is what happens. So we can fund projects. Many of our projects are successful. They also often successfully pilot inside the healthcare system. I think the question is what comes after. And so how do we actually drive and how do we create the opportunity for the healthcare to implement at scale and procure at scale? I think that's a really important part of this journey. I think we also are looking at what are the type of actors that can maintain some of the collective good assets that are coming out of the research programs. So if you are developing, say, standards and agreements on how you deal with data and data transfers between countries, who are the actors in the system that will look after them long term? And I think there are many of these questions that I think will be really critical in the connection with the competitiveness fund in the future.
Absolutely. I have more questions on that, but I am also keen. I'm not really the person that always waits till the very end for the audience to come in. So are there already any immediate reactions or questions? Let me see, otherwise. Yes, I see a hand over there. My colleague will comment. Just if you could briefly state your name and affiliation briefly, that would be helpful.
Hello, good afternoon. Does this work? Yes? Anyway, even if it's a small room, I was a bit late, so apologies if you touched upon this topic already. My name is Sara Rafael Almeida, and I'm a former policy officer in DigiSante. I wanted to ask you about the pharma strategy and what it means for IHI, particularly in what it concerns to provisions that were very much research, innovation based, and they were thought for that, especially the provisions allowing the EMA to have what is called these regulatory science activities, and then it was the regulatory sandboxes that you alluded to. How are these provisions and others that you might find relevant, but specifically for the work of IHI and your unique role in really working with industry? Thank you.
So that's a really good question. So one of the things that the setup with this joint undertaking allows to be is a neutral actor in the system, and as you know, it's often difficult for regulators like EMA, but also the national regulators, to participate in projects with industry because they will move on to regulate. But actually, that's one of the things that is possible within IHI, because it is, as you point out, it's foreseen in the regulation, and it's actually to some extent expected of these actors that they collaborate. And so it's possible to create that neutral platform. So about 2 years ago, it was just when I started, it was February 2024, we had what we call a regulatory science summit. That's a regular feature. We run it every sort of 24 to 36 months, where we had EMA, national regulators, notified bodies. We also had FDA representation, and then of course industry commission and some of the other actors. We talked about at that summit, there were 5 different areas we talked about, and actually since then we've launched projects against all those 5 areas. So we talked about regulatory sandboxes. I think that's probably one of our flagships. Another important area, and we had a call open this summer, around artificial intelligence in pharmacovigilance. So can you improve signal detection in pharmacovigilance? We have launched a project on rare diseases and improved clinical trial methodologies for rare and ultra-rare diseases. And I forgot one area. Well, it doesn't matter. But I think that's really how we like to work. And we've been... EMA have a seat in the Science and Innovation Panel of IHI, and so we have a regular and close dialogue with them around the regulatory science, because indeed, sort of, it's important for them to be able to do the science today that allow them to assess the innovations of tomorrow, and I think that's where we try to help.
Another bottleneck, and I think that comes to the point about working with regulators, is also how to deal with clinical trials endpoints, and especially perhaps in light also of digital biomarkers. It is very important to also work on how to improve it, because that's typically, I think, a function where you see that public-private partnerships are better placed than, for example, companies, because it would benefit the entire ecosystem if you have more agreement on endpoints. Is that something that you also engage with regulators on as IHI?
We do, but often in a very different way, because for the biomarkers, the role of the regulators is to be a regulator, not an innovator. And so, and I think we keep a very clear separation of the sort of regulatory science innovation side of the program to the biomarker, because here the regulators will have a regulatory opinion. But that said, this is an area where we invest quite a lot of resources from the office to support the projects through a regulatory journey. And I think this is one of the areas where the public-private partnership really comes to the fore, because the private partners, of course, are very good at taking products through a regulation to the market, and so they often contribute with a lot of resources and expertise into our projects. But we had a webinar exactly on this topic last week, a training webinar for our projects and coordinators to understand how do you build a good, solid regulatory strategy early in the project. Because once you come to the end, it's often too late to do the studies. You need to plan the studies in the early phases of the project, so you have enough evidence and around the context of use to take it forward at the end of the project.
Is that public information, your webinar, or is that?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, just for the audience, perhaps, this question.
Absolutely. Yeah, our website is a treasure trove for past and future applicants.
Oh, your Christmas present, in case you were waiting for it. I want to touch on, because you mentioned the general pharmaceutical legislation. And of course, that was launched also with the aim to address affordability and accessibility. But I think we all know that the reality on the ground is very often different, in the sense that I think I read the other day that I think 49% of medicines don't make it in the majority of member states, meaning that there is a big difference on the ground between, let's say, if you're a patient living in Germany and the access you get when you live, let's say, in Romania. So that equity element, how do you build that in? Are you able, as IHI, when you work in projects also with the industry, to address that topic, or is that something which is beyond your remit?
It's largely beyond our remit, I have to say. It's, I mean, we're part of Horizon Europe with the research program. Many of these discussions sits under other policy areas, so it's clearly outside the mandate of IHI. That said, I think that there is a really important part of this, and I think if you take accessibility too far into the innovation part, you try to regulate something that doesn't even exist yet, which is quite complicated. So I think perhaps there are better avenues than research to look at accessibility and affordability. But that said, we have a project on clinical trials right now, which is looking at representativeness and diversity of inclusion. And so I think it's a really important topic, and I think this is where there is a joint public and private. So this is a topic in the sweet spot. How do you get representative sampling of different parts of the European population, or all parts of the European population, into your studies? Because this will impact not only the safety, efficacy, but also the reimbursement discussions. So there we are looking at it's called READY, but it's looking at inclusivity in clinical trials. And of course, it's not always easy to recruit, say, in a socioeconomic disadvantaged area.
But very important, and also links, I think, to a lot of the work that we've been doing, including, for example, on women's health, where I think there's another element of inclusion which is important. Yeah. I think. Oh, there's another question. Yes, perhaps if the mic can go.
I more just wanted to build on what you just said, because I think while I understand your approach in kind of disconnecting access to the medicine once it's approved versus the research part, if it's not a virtuous cycle, there's not going to be the investment in Europe to do the clinical trials. So, as a pharmaceutical company, obviously you are taking on a risk, right? And if you're investing the expenses of doing a clinical trial and you're starting patients on your medication, you want to have some degree of assurances that once it is proven efficacious and approved by EMA, that patients will then have access to the drug in the country where you've invested to do these clinical trials. So I do think that you do have to be mindful of that full virtuous cycle, I'll call it, kind of end to end, to make sure that investments continue to happen in Europe from a research perspective.
I think that's a very fair point that we have been writing about quite often here at the EPC as well. So absolutely thanks for that question. Were there other questions? I think Pavel here, and then also there.
Hello. Thank you very much. It's been very insightful so far. One topic which maybe wasn't discussed and which might fall outside of your remit, but I'll ask anyway. I think that with regards to the biotech environment and innovation in general, something that isn't discussed very much is venture capital. In my quick preliminary scan of the Biotech Act, very briefly, I've seen that it was something that was touched upon. And I was wondering maybe to what extent venture capital is investigated as maybe a potential solution to the lack of innovation, or as you were saying, innovation moving from the EU to the US. And is that something maybe you discuss or investigate even in the context of clinical trials, for example?
I think the answer is no, but I'll try to be a bit constructive again. So I think so there are other actors in the European family that are much better placed to look at venture capital. So if you look at the European Innovation Council, for instance, the EIC, that's very much how they build their projects. They invest in ideas in small companies and then try to build them through the startup phase. And now it's the scale-up fund. So there are other instruments. As a funder, IHI doesn't look at venture capital, and it's not a good fit for the program because we were designed to do other things. That doesn't mean that it's unimportant. It's just dealt with through other instruments.
Yep, thank you, Niklas, for a fascinating lecture. I want to pick up on the point you said you made about having the right actors in the room, and that in the context of the need to bend the cost curve, which is absolutely essential because I mean in the brain fields we will face a demographic tsunami, so to say, with enormous impact on the cost side of the equation. But what would that mean to have the right people, the right actors in the room to bend that curve? Because when you look at the industry, you can very often have incumbent approaches that are more focused on having more of the same, right? Because if something works, why change it? But how do you really generate active interest in squaring the circle when it comes to the health economics of it? And especially if prevention is the answer, who are the right actors for projects such as yours? I mean, it's all of us, right? Dementia, 45% of dementias can be prevented, as the Lancet Commission has shown. 14 modifiable risk factors. So how do you, sitting at IHI, sort of look at inviting the right constituencies to be part of the exercise?
That's a great question. It's probably one of our biggest challenges is actually to make sure that we reach out beyond the sort of traditional research family of university hospitals and the R&D departments of industry. We are trying to target them specifically through events and through outreach. We have a lot of very good support, I have to say, from the national contact points and our the national reference group, what we call the sort of member state representatives group, who are helping us to reach out at the national level. It's a couple of areas that we looked at. So one is European healthcare regions. How do we bring in more of the healthcare actors, not only as the research arm through the university medical centers, but also through the care arm, and so get the care part of the healthcare regions in. Patient organizations have been very important. I think we also always look for deep and meaningful involvement of patients, and the mechanism beyond the outreach. We also run what we call brokerage events, but essentially matchmaking events to make sure that people can meet. So at the end of the day, the challenge is, of course, that for this to work, it's not, we don't need to talk to them. It's the community that need to meet and discuss between themselves, because the proposals and the projects are not constructed by us. They are awarded by us after a competitive procedure, and so we need to find ways of connecting these different actors in the discussions. And so for us, the brokerage event, the matchmaking platforms, and we have a sort of a whole toolkit of activities just to help to bring together, because it is a multidisciplinary program, and we think that we need to find a multidisciplinary sort of constellations to drive the innovations.
It's time for one last question. I see two, so I allow you two. So here, just in the back.
Hello, thank you very much for your words. I was really heartened to hear, sorry, my name is Dr. Dakshana Gamanpilla. I was really heartened to hear you say the idea that Europe should not be on the back foot and that we should be proactive in what we do. I was going to ask about diversity in clinical trials, but you nicely preempted that, both of you. I thank you, Elizabeth, for the mention of women's health. But how do we go about telling and selling that positive story of multidisciplinary actors and involvement? And I love that you said communities should be involved in this. How do we talk to them? How do we engage them in this? Big question, I'm sorry.
It's a wonderful, big and juicy question for the 45 seconds that we have, isn't it? I don't know. I think we all struggle with that, and I think we all need good ideas to come together. We try to work. Patient organizations are often really helpful. We have, and I think one of the things that we've done over many years is try to have strong partnership with the patient organizations and help them to shape. And I often think that it's not only to do science differently, but actually what that helps us to do is to do different science. If we look in the area of digital health and mobility, a lot of the modern digital health applications come very, very close to surveillance. And if you want to do advanced research there, you actually need to bring in the patients. We have examples of monitoring depression via mobile phone. This would not be possible without having a deep involvement of patients. We have smart homes that look at dementia. Again, if you have being measured when you come up in your pajamas to get a cup of tea, you need to have the patient organizations as part of the design. So I think that's one aspect. The other, I think coming back to the capabilities, not cash. I think the philanthropic organizations are really a wonderful asset here. We see in our type 1 diabetes projects the help that we've got from the diabetes. It's a coalition of diabetes associations on the breakthrough T1D. And they of course have very strong links into the communities. And so they are also very useful ways of reaching out. So I think that when we talk about these partnerships, coming back to that, it's capabilities. It's not cash, it's capabilities.
You have the last question.
Thank you very much. It was very insightful. Luisa Camarosano from Johnson & Johnson, which I joined actually only 3 months ago. But prior to that, I was working in a joint undertaking at CESAR, at Eurocontrol, so in the aviation sector. And now I'm also engaged in public-private partnership with other projects at Johnson & Johnson. So it might be a stretch, but I was wondering maybe a broader question. Those are very different sectors, but I think we can draw some common points. For example, highly regulated, it's difficult to do research, long term to have results. But then I was wondering, is there any common or best practices that you have seen among different joint undertakings, among different sectors? Is there an ongoing dialogue or not at all? And then maybe if you can give your insight on the competitiveness fund, because you talked about it, but not clearly. Thank you.
So very shortly, and then for everyone else. So we are not alone. There are 10 different of these joint undertakings in different industrial sectors, and I think what they have in common is that they are sort of important, strategically important technology sectors for Europe. One of them is aviation, and I think there are two. One is Eurocontrol, so looking at the way planes fly, and the other one is clean aviation, looking more at how you can make planes fly cleaner. They're also in global health and in the circular bioeconomy and so on. We work very closely together. We're actually located in the same building in Brussels, and so we have collaboration both on the programmatic side, looking and discussing on the programs, but also on the sort of more mundane back office, working together on the sort of operational side. So there is quite a lot of exchange of knowledge. On the competitiveness fund, I think that's very much an unwritten chapter. One of the things, and again, I think it's beyond IHI, but I think one of the things I really would like to see is to think about health strategically, because the different technology windows or the different industrial sectors will need different things, and health is perhaps quite different to say microelectronics or high performance computing AI, because the ultimate procurement will be done by the member states. In Europe, it's solidarity-based healthcare, and so the innovation will always happen within that solidarity-based healthcare system. And I think that might need a slightly different set of industrial policy instruments in the competitiveness fund compared to, say, the energy sector or some of the other sectors.
Thanks so much for that, Niklas. I think we could have gone on much longer, but I think this gave us a really good flavor indeed of what IHI is doing, and I think also in the years to come, I think we will be seeing back a lot of what you said, because indeed I think the discussion about the MFF, the competitiveness fund, is a really interesting one, where hopefully in the months to come we have more detail about how memberships are shaping the discussion. But many thanks to you for indeed having that positive message, and indeed stressing the fact that Europe is not on the back foot. Hopefully with the Biotech Act, we have another instrument to prove where we are, how we do excellence, and also, as you mentioned, how topics, actors, and instruments are important and are important in driving and shaping that agenda. So many thanks for enlightening us this afternoon. This was actually the last annual lecture of the Coalition for Health, Ethics and Society. So many thanks to Johnson & Johnson for having supported the initiative. Many thanks to all of you to be here. I think it's clear also from the publications that we put out on the table that we have been doing a lot of work this year, but I think for next year we have even more initiatives lined up. So please do follow us. So with that, I really would like to thank you, wishing you a good break, and please join me in applause for Niklas, and thank you again very much.